For decades, America was told that race-based districting was necessary to protect voting rights. But this week, the Supreme Court said something very different. You cannot fight discrimination by making race the organizing principle of American politics. And that decision may reshape Congress, the South, and the Democratic Party's entire electoral strategy. The case is Louisiana versus Calais. At issue was whether Louisiana had to redraw its congressional map to create a second majority black district. Supporters said this was required under the Voting Rights Act. Critics said it was racial gerrymandering, drawing political boundaries primarily by race. The Supreme Court sided against the race-based map, and immediately the media claimed the court had gutted the Voting Rights Act. But that is not what happened. The court did not say minorities cannot be protected from discrimination. It said race cannot become the default basis for political representation. That distinction matters, because the premise behind these districts is deeply troubling. That black voters can only be represented by black politicians, that white voters will not vote for black candidates, that Americans must be sorted into political blocks by skin color. But modern America has already disproven that assumption. Barack Obama was elected president twice in a country where black Americans make up roughly 12% of the population. And many black members of Congress are elected from districts that are not racially engineered. The practical stakes are enormous. According to the article, there are 21 House districts shaped by this kind of racial logic. In an era where House majorities are decided by razor-thin margins, 21 seats can determine everything: spending, immigration, judges, foreign policy, impeachment, oversight. That is why this fight is not just about Louisiana. It is about whether one party can keep using race-conscious districting as a political machine. Daniel McCarthy calls it a racial spoils system. The argument is simple. Democrats did not merely use these maps to increase representation. They used them to secure power. But the moral problem may be even bigger. If America believes in equal protection, then representation cannot mean racial ownership. A congressman does not only represent voters who look like him. A senator does not only serve one tribe. And a republic cannot survive if every voter is reduced to race, ethnicity, sex, or identity category. That is the opposite of civic equality. It is the opposite of Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision that people should be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. The irony is hard to miss. Segregation was once defended as separation by race. Now, some defend race-based districts as a tool for justice. But separating voters by race, even for supposedly noble purposes, still trains the country to think racially. It teaches politicians to campaign racially. And it teaches voters that their interests are determined by bloodline, not belief. That may have seemed like a temporary emergency remedy after Jim Crow, but 60 years later, the Supreme Court appears to be saying, emergency remedies cannot become permanent racial government. This decision is part of a much larger shift. For much of the 20th century, Democrats benefited from a second layer of political rules: court precedents, administrative power, civil rights interpretations, and institutional norms that operated almost like a second constitution. Now, many of those assumptions are being challenged. Affirmative action has already taken a major blow. DEI is under national scrutiny. Race-based political mapping is now being restricted. The old racial regime is not collapsing all at once. But it is cracking. Democrats will not simply accept this. Expect louder calls to pack the Supreme Court. Expect renewed pushes for DC statehood and Puerto Rico statehood. Expect more arguments that any limit on race-conscious policy is an attack on democracy itself, because the rules are now part of the fight, not just who wins elections, but how the map is drawn, how representation is defined. And whether America remains a constitutional republic based on equal citizenship, or becomes a spoils system built around identity groups. The Supreme Court's message is clear. Race can no longer be the permanent foundation of American election law. That does not erase the past. It does not deny real discrimination where it exists. But it does reject the idea that America should be governed by racial sorting forever. And that may be why the reaction has been so intense. Because if race-based politics loses legal protection, Democrats lose one of the most powerful tools they have used to hold congressional power. The court did not gut the Voting Rights Act. It gutted racial gerrymandering. For more analysis on politics, power, and the Constitution.